important thing, right, you've heard that I've been serving as the Delaware Riverkeeper, leading a 4-state organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, for nearly 30 years now. And it's as a result of that work that I've come to found and advance this Green Amendments for the Generations movement. But I think the most important thing out of all of that, in terms of my history and my experience, that I want you to know about me is that I have been doing environmental activism, and I have been an environmental attorney for nearly 30 years now. And it's as a result of that work that I, like so many of you, have experienced the myriad of ways that our current system of environmental protection laws, no matter what state you're in, fundamentally fails us. And so that we really do need a new pathway for environmental protection. And that's what the Green Amendment movement and a Green Amendment in every state constitution across our nation and ultimately at the federal level will do for us. So I just want to start, though, with a story of one very real family. This story is not set in Florida, but it could be. And so it could be set, frankly, in any state across our nation. So I just want to start with a story to really ground us in why we need to fight to protect the environment. So this is from chapter 8 of the book. Gina was sick constantly, experiencing frequent gastrointestinal issues and hair loss that left her with permanent bald spots. Gina's daughter had been born with an extra ear, but no one had endured greater suffering or paid a higher price for Mount Aire's callously destructive actions and pollution than Gina's son, Kiwanis. Like Gina, Kiwanis had been born with asthma. His case was particularly severe. When your asthma is at its worst, it's like somebody pulled a plastic bag over your head and just pulled on a string and cut off all your air circulation, Gina says. He really suffered. He just suffered. When Kiwanis left Millsboro for a year to attend school, his condition seemed to improve significantly. But then he came home, and his asthma was once again a daily source of hardship. Despite nebulizers, inhalers, prescription steroids, and an EpiPen, he struggled to keep it under control. On March 5th, 2014, Gina got a frantic phone call. While hanging out in a house full of friends, Kiwanis had suffered an extremely severe asthma attack. They were calling an ambulance, and she needed to drive immediately to the hospital. By the time Gina arrived, Kiwanis had passed away. He was just 24 years old. I checked with his job, and he went to work early that night, and he stayed until the time to get off, Gina recalls. And he wasn't sick. He didn't tell me he was sick or anything. It was an incomprehensible loss. Just as incomprehensible was the official cause, confirmed by an autopsy that it took Gina nearly 4 months to get a hold of. It said that he had died from an acute asthma attack, she says. And I was like, who dies from asthma anymore? Another heart-wrenching reality was that the very same pollution that likely caused Kiwanis' death had also likely affected him from the very beginning of his life. One evening, Gina sent Maria a form and asked her to take a look. It was a form for supplemental security income, a type of Social Security assistance for people with disabilities, which Gina had been receiving for Kiwanis. The SSI form said that he could not be educated because of a lack of oxygen to the brain, Maria recalls. Now, there is no bigger crime against humanity than a child who, because of pollution exposure issues, cannot develop to be the person that they ought to be. Now, when people hear stories like that, they think, how is it possible? How is it possible that that can be happening here in the United States of America? Don't we as people on this earth, at least we as people here in the U.S. have a right to clean water, to clean air, to a stable climate, and to healthy environments? And the fact of the matter is, here in the United States of America, we have all kinds of rights. We have a right to free speech and freedom of religion. We have private property rights. We even have a right to bear arms. But we do not have a right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. That simply is not our right. That may be a right we hold in our hearts, but it is not a right that we can enforce. So is it really a right? What we have here in Florida, what we have in states across our nation instead is a system of laws and governance that's supposed to be protecting our environment. Unfortunately, this system of laws is very literally focused on legalizing environmental pollution and degradation through a system of reviews and permits. This is not a system of laws that is focused on prevention of pollution, prevention of degradation, prevention of harm in the first place. It is a system of laws that are filled with gaps and loopholes. There are all kinds of things, contaminants and industrial operations, that are not regulated at all or are regulated with just a touch, very lightly, because of this series of gaps and loopholes. If there's a gap in the law, it means you have nothing to enforce. Whether you're a person or you're a regulator, there's nothing you can do about it. It's a system of laws and governance that embraces environmental racism, so that communities of color, indigenous communities, low-income communities are consistently and disproportionately targeted for highly polluting industrial operations, affecting all the people in that community, supposedly to protect the rest of us. The rest of us generally are people who are more affluent, who have more money, who have better political connections, and who tend to be a lot whiter. It is a system of laws and governance where children are an afterthought, and where industry has greater access to the levers of power in order to determine what laws actually do get passed, how are they written, whether or not they're enforced when they do hit the books. And so as a result, we have real people who are suffering real harm. And I just want to add one more story from the book to really emphasize that point. Again, this is not a story that is happening here in Florida, but it is a story where I've lost my page. And, but it could be happening here. It could be happening here. In 1987, a young couple, if I can get my glasses on, and now I've lost my page, so my oh my, this better be a good story. It's a good story, but it's a bad story. That's unfortunate. In 1987, a young couple, Kate and Larry Stauffer, were looking to buy a starter house. When they drove through General Warren Village, they knew they had found their new home. The village was a quiet neighborhood on a dead-end street with mature trees where they could afford a nice-sized piece of land along with a quaint little house. Kate and Larry were planning to start a family, so the presence of other young couples with kids sealed the deal. What Kate and Larry didn't know was that they were moving in next to a toxic site, one that state officials had already flagged as a source of oozing and ongoing pollution. Living approximately 100 yards from the plant over years of its operation, Kate and Larry Stauffer noticed intermittent chlorine-like smells around their property, but they thought little of it. We were busy raising a family and didn't pay too much attention to what was going on, Larry remembers. The plant closed in 1999 when the couple's oldest son, Nicholas, was in high school. He often joined his friends to hang out in the facility's abandoned buildings. The Stauffer's daughter, Liz, who was born in 1990, played in nearby Little Valley Creek, the same creek that was later found to be heavily contaminated from the site. All three Stauffer children collected rocks from the creek for a geology unit in their middle school science class. On his daily walk with the dogs, Larry sometimes noticed overwhelming chemical smells coming from the buildings. He and Kate discouraged their children from playing in these areas, but as they later learned, people didn't have to enter the buildings to be exposed to the toxins from the Bishop Tube operations. Since 2006, Liz has been diagnosed with 3 brain tumors. Kate and Larry aren't positive whether they can blame Bishop Tube for their daughter's cancer. Because of the many toxins and contaminants in our environment, medical and legal professionals often can't conclusively link individual toxins and specific health outcomes. The Stauffers, nonetheless, find it eerie that so many in nearby neighborhoods have suffered serious illnesses, including other children. 5 neighborhood children received cancer diagnoses within a year of each other, including Liz's friend from down the road. After conducting their own research, the staffers found TCE exposure has been linked to central nervous system defects. Although Liz is thankfully in remission now, many others in the small community continue to suffer from life-threatening illnesses, and some of them even death. You know, and again, that was a story from another state. Could have been a story from here in Florida, but we don't need to look to the book. We can look to the news headlines to see all the problems that are happening in Florida, despite the fact that we have this system of environmental protection laws at the state level, at the federal level. People are being harmed, nature's being harmed, and we're having serious consequences as a result. The thing is, right, we've talked about how our environment, our environmental rights that we hold in our heart, I mean, we do actually, as people here on this earth, we do have an inherent and indefeasible, inalienable right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. We all know that. We all know that inside our hearts, inside our souls, inside our minds. But because, again, they're not enforceable, these rights really aren't meaningful. And one of the biggest problems is that we don't recognize these environmental rights in the same constitutional document that we recognize all those other fundamental rights we hold dear, like the right to free speech, freedom of religion, private property rights, and more. And yet we know that our environmental rights are worthy of this highest constitutional recognition and protection. That is what actually a Green Amendment does for our environmental rights. It actually places our environmental rights on par with these other fundamental freedoms. We all know how powerfully those other fundamental freedoms are protected because they're recognized in our state and federal constitutions. Well, the Constitutional Green Amendment gives our environmental rights that same highest standing placement and enforceability. Very literally, again, placing our environmental rights on par with those other fundamental freedoms that we hold dear. Now, if you want environmental rights to get the same most powerful constitutional legal protection that we give to those other fundamental freedoms, not just any language anywhere in the Constitution will do. And we know that because the truth is, almost every state across our nation talks about the environment. Some of them even talk about environmental rights already within their constitutions. Florida is among them. But only Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York, as a result of our success in 2021, place environmental rights on par with those other fundamental freedoms. We also know that not just any language in the Constitution will do if you want to give highest constitutional recognition and protection to fundamental rights because of the recent Supreme Court decision with regards to abortion at the federal level. This is, I don't care what your position is on abortion. That's not the point that's being made here. The point that's being made here is that for 50 years, people with a uterus had a right to an abortion because Supreme Court justices read into the 14th Amendment right of privacy that fundamental right, right? So that happened. So for 50 years, if you had a uterus and you wanted an abortion, you had a fundamental right to get it. Even though that language wasn't explicitly in the Constitution, it was read into language that the justices found there. But that's the problem. The language isn't explicitly there. So when a new set of Supreme Court justices had a different personal opinion on the matter, they were able to mention of the right to an abortion for people with a uterus. And therefore it doesn't exist. It was the absence of explicit language in the Constitution placed in the right location that allowed the Supreme Court justices to just turn things around on a dime. So we know that we need specific language. There are key criteria, what I call Green Amendment criteria, that have to be met if we want to give our rights, our human right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment in true highest protection, recognition, and enforceability in whatever state we're in or across our nation. So what are those key criteria? Well, the first is that the language has to be in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. Non-negotiable, must have. That's because that's where we place all the other human, civil, and political rights we hold dear, and as a result, they get special legal interpretation and protection. If we want to give that special legal interpretation and that highest protection to our environmental rights, we have to place them in the same portion of the Constitution. We have to be clear that we are protecting the rights of all people. We have to be clear about what we're protecting. These fundamental essentials of life when it comes to the environment: water, air, ecosystems. It's essential that the language be what we call self-executing, meaning it has legal life and enforceability in its own right. You have a right to clean water, you can enforce that right. You don't have to ferret down and find some law that the legislators have passed to give this right legal life. You just have to turn to the Constitution, just like you turn to the Constitution for your right to free speech. If you think it's being infringed upon, you don't have to find a law that defines it and explains it. You just turn to the Constitution. The same thing would happen with the environment if it's self-executed. We have to be clear that this is an obligation on all government officials to protect our environment, to protect our environmental rights. It is very valuable if the language, either directly or indirectly, gives you the ability to protect the environment, not just for the present generations here today, but the future generations yet to come. The Florida Right to Clean Water language does that. There's a way within the language that we accomplish that. So what do we get if we pass the Green Amendment? Let me tell you, there are other criteria, tremendous value added. I can't go through the whole list. So those are some of the essentials, just to give you an idea that it's not just willy-nilly, it's not just, well, we're going to throw up into the Constitution. We really know what we need to do to give our environment that highest protection. So what do we get if we have a Green Amendment added to our state and federal constitutions? Well, we get transformational change when it comes to the law. And we get transformational change, yes, when it comes to the law. So, sorry, I thought there was going to be another slide there too. I did it again, Jim. This is fine, but that's good. We're going to change things, right? What are the things we're going to change? Well, I've said it 3 times. If you haven't heard it, okay, right? They say in marketing, sometimes you have to hear things 6 times before it takes hold. So let's do it again. If you have a constitutional Green Amendment, it means you lift up environmental rights so they are given the same highest constitutional standing, recognition, and protection as those other fundamental rights we hold dear. We all know how powerfully the right to free speech, the right to freedom of religion, the right to bear arms are protected. We all know when somebody comes forth and says that those fundamental rights are being infringed upon, we can witness, we can see how powerfully their community rises up with them to defend that right, how powerfully our elected officials, our judicial system, the press rise up to help defend that fundamental right that's being infringed upon. Well, that same incredible power and energy now comes to bear for the environment. Government necessarily becomes focused on preventing environmental pollution and degradation first. In every action they take, they must focus first on prevention or they risk violating their constitutional obligations. Environmental justice is tremendously empowered because now all, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their tribal membership status, their socioeconomics, their gender, their geography, all people now have the same constitutional right. And all government officials are constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people equitably. We no longer can have intent. You don't have to show that government officials are doing that because they are racist or biased. You just have to show that that's the reality of the outcome. That communities of color, low-income communities, indigenous communities are suffering disproportionately. And then you can think about how you could make that case. We really do get generational justice, right? We all know how important it is to protect future generations. We all know that the decisions that we are making today have devastating consequences potentially for future generations. We all know that there are some environmental decisions with regards to pollution going into the water, into the air, onto our landscapes, that maybe right now in the immediate present have some harm. But over time, the accumulation of that pollution and degradation and harm will have devastating consequences for generations in the future. So ensuring that long-term thinking and decision-making is critical for ensuring that we are doing right by our obligation to young people now who are looking to grow up happy and healthy, and to those that have those who are yet to be born. Sometimes we will hear from the opposition that, oh my gosh, if we pass this constitutional green amendment, the whole world will go to hell. All the laws that we have on the books to deal with the environment will just be wiped away. My God, what will we do? And that's ridiculous, right? What happens now is we take that existing body of law and we strengthen them, right? Those laws don't go away. They become stronger. Right now, how those laws are interpreted and are applied are largely in the hands of government officials, of regulators. They get to decide what it means. And all too often, their definition of what clean water is way too weak, right? It's not actually protecting people's healthy lives. But if we have a constitutional green amendment, then all those existing laws now must be interpreted and implemented through the lens of the obligation to protect the environmental rights of all the people, right? So now those weak interpretations don't work anymore. Now government officials must give strong interpretation, strong implementation. They must actually enforce the laws that are on the books. They can't just ignore them, right? So we strengthen what we already have. Of course, we create a powerful foundation for new protections. And we also have a gap filler now. Like I said, there are so many areas of environmental pollution and degradation that are not addressed by the law. If you have a right to clean water, when there's a gap in the law, you can turn to that right to get the protection you need. How many people have heard about PFAS? Okay, it looks like everybody, right? So maybe not everybody, some people. So PFAS is a man-made family of chemicals, very toxic, that's used on Teflon, right? That, slippery frying pans, in stain-resistant clothing or carpeting. It's actually in firefighting foam that the military has used often and, is constantly practicing how to address or put out fires using this foam filled with PFAS. Because of an absence of laws or regulations, there was nothing there to say that as industry and the government were developing these chemicals and using them in ways that were allowing them to just easily get out into the environment because of an absence of regulation. We now have PFAS contamination in waterways and environments across our nation. We have people that are literally drinking PFAS in their drinking water, including here in Florida. We have farmers that are losing their farms because PFAS contamination has gotten into their dairy cows or their meat cows. And now the PFAS is in the milk, and so they're literally having to throw the milk away, and they're having to destroy the cows, which guess what, is destroying their farms and destroying their livelihoods and destroying their families. In the state of Maine, you can't hunt for deer because PFAS contamination is in deer flesh. And so it's no longer safe to hunt the deer and eat the flesh. In many states, you can't eat the fish that you catch because of PFAS contamination. All of that is because of an absence of law and regulation. Well, if while all of this was starting to happen, we had a constitutional right to clean water, we could have all turned to our constitutional right to say, government officials, your failure to act to protect us from PFAS is resulting in a violation of our constitutional right to clean water. You must act now. And that's exactly what we did in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, by the way, and now we're getting PFAS regulations because we do have a constitutional right in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to, amongst other things, pure water. Right? So it's a great gap filler. And if you believe that your constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment has been infringed upon, you can go to court and do something about it. You can make your case and try to make a change. You don't have to find a law that gives you permission to go to court. The Constitution doesn't just give you permission, it gives you that right. And it's not just about the law. Yes, we secure transformational change when it comes to the law, but it's not just about the law. It's also about empowering environmental activists and environmental activism. Right now, people get up and they are righteously and rightly fighting to protect the water, the air, the climate, the ecosystems that are essential for supporting every aspect of our lives, right? As well as supporting nature itself. And you're getting up there and you're fighting for what you believe in. And for some of us, that's good enough. We have the internal fortitude to just get up and fight for what we believe in. But for a lot of people, it's kind of hard to be an environmental activist. You'll get up to the front of that hearing room, and all your neighbors are behind you, and you've got some decision makers in front of you, and inevitably, one, some, or very many in the room will say, disregard them. They're just a tree hugger. They're a fish lover. And I like those terms, by the way, but not everybody feels that way. They're saying, you're a people hater. You're a job killer. Yeah. Or like I like to tell people about, one FERC commissioner said, you're an eco-jihadist. Anything to try to shame you, to make you feel bad because you're fighting for the earth. For whatever reason you're fighting for the earth. Maybe it's because you care about people, maybe it's because you care about nature, but somehow they're trying to get you to sit down and shut up so that you stop fighting for the earth. And for many people, it's hard to withstand that name calling, right? It feels really, really bad. But if you are now at the same time not just fighting for the rivers and the creeks in your community and the forests and the critters and the manatees, but you are at the same time fighting for a constitutional right, it transforms the way you think about what you're advocating for. It transforms the way people think about you, because you are now a resident of this state standing up and fighting for your constitutional right. You are now a true patriot, standing up for the constitutional rights of all people in your community, in your state, and in our nation. And that's powerful, and that's important, and that's a transformative way of thinking. It makes it all different. It makes you feel different about what you're doing, if you need that, and it makes people feel different about the way they view you, right? Like I truly, here in the United States, even if people don't agree with what you're fighting for, if you are standing up there and talking about the Constitution, they view you differently. Even people who disagree with you, they don't become dismissive in that same kind of way. They might still call you names, but it's a lot harder. Now, the Green Amendment movement is a nationwide movement, but it's starting with state leadership. We are going state by state by state trying to get constitutional Green Amendment protections, and at some point we'll come to the right tipping point and we'll be poised to get a federal Green Amendment. But we don't want to hop to the federal too quickly, too early. One, we all know that that's going to fail, right? And if we start to talk about a federal Green Amendment too early, it's going to suck all the air out of the room. All the press and all the money, right? And all the attention is going to go to this federal effort that we're never going to win, not right now, right? We have a lot of work to do to get to the point of getting a federal Green Amendment. We have to educate people in every single community across our nation. We have to educate our elected leaders so that when that Green Amendment opportunity comes up, we are poised to get successfully that 3/4 vote in support. But as important, if not more important than that, the truth is that when it comes to environmental protection, states have an incredible amount of power, right? There's a division of labor here in the U.S. when it comes to environmental protection. States have a lot of power, and the federal government has a lot of power. So, and at the state level, constitutional amendments are very accessible. They happen with regularity. It's much easier for the people to access the constitutional amendment system at the state level than at the federal level, whatever that process, that pathway is for your state. And so the thing is, it makes strategic sense. Let's go at the state level first, educate, right? Activate, get that constitutional Green Amendment in the near term so that we can get near-term better protections for our environment and true recognition of our environmental rights. And then as we're doing that, we are already creating the platform, the foundation necessary to ultimately get at a federal level, right? So it's just good strategy. Start at the state level, get the Green Amendment, prove its power, prove its importance through good precedent, good legal precedent, good activism, and prove to everybody that it also makes sense to get a federal Green Amendment. And we need them both. I don't care if we hop to the federal right away and we got that tomorrow. We would still need state amendments because, again, states have a lot of power. So we need them both. So it makes more sense strategically to start with the states. And our Green Amendment movement is advancing very, very powerfully, very, very quickly. Well, while the philanthropic community doesn't seem to understand the power and importance of this pathway and aren't throwing their dollars at it yet, right? The people on the grassroots, the lawyers, they see how powerful it is. Elected officials who care about the environment, they see how powerful it is. Guess what? Industry sees how powerful it is. That's why they're coming out in opposition, right? But this is a movement that's growing powerfully and quickly because of the people. We have the 3 amendments in Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York. We got New York's passed in the November election 2021 by over 70% of the vote. That wasn't just Democrats, all partisan issue, to get that high vote count. But we also have Green Amendment language in a number of states. In New Mexico, in Iowa, in Maine, in New Jersey, in Delaware, in Maryland, very powerfully here in the state of Florida, right? Very powerfully here in the state of Florida. And we have other states that are coming on board all the time. But when I go around the nation and I talk to people about the power of this movement and how effectively it's being implemented by the grassroots level, I talk about the state of Florida because you are really at the forefront of the Green Amendment movement. You are making powerful progress for yourself here in the state of Florida, but you are also serving as an inspiration for other communities in other states across our nation. So good on you, and thank you for doing that because it makes my job a lot easier. Now, does it really make a difference? And I'm just going to do the short form on this, right? I can give you all kinds of cases and examples really proving the point that it does make a difference to get a constitutional Green Amendment, right? We have a number of really successful cases. They're in the book. We could talk about it if you ask me about one of them. But very simply, we have been able to defeat incredibly pro-industry legislation because of Green Amendment existence. If a law has been passed by your legislature and signed by your governor, it's very, very hard to defeat that law, right? You can lobby and protest and demand that they roll it back, you know, but the chances are if your legislators just passed that law, they're not going to do that, right? You know, you can try to vote better people into office, but the law's already being implemented and the damage is already being done. You can sit down and shut up, which usually is what happens because there is no other opportunity to challenge it. But if you have a constitutional Green Amendment, you have the most powerful tool you need to take on the law, the higher power of the Constitution, because the Constitution is above the laws, all government officials, right? So you now have the tool you need to challenge a law that's problematic, and it's up to you to make the right case. When there's permitting, when permits have been issued to industrial operations that are going to have devastating consequences for the environment, for our communities, you can turn to the Green Amendment to turn that back. We actually have a number of successful examples where permits that were issued by state agencies to industrial operations, where those permits have been literally voided by the courts, in part because of the existence of a Green Amendment in that state. We have examples where there are existing problems. Toxic contamination, like that I told you about the story of the Stoffers. That Bishop Tube site was in that toxic condition actually for over 30 years. The site's super saturated with TCE. The state, right, that it had a pollution plume that at this point that pollution plume is more than a mile away from the site. The state, there was existing law mandating that the state secure cleanup of that site by the known responsible corporate parties. Johnson Matthey Corporation and Whitaker Corporation. Let's name them, right? But rather than enforce the existing law and get those responsible parties to use their big bucks to clean up that site, what was the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection doing? Negotiating a sweetheart deal with the developer so they could develop that site with over 200 homes while it remained in its toxic condition with no plan for cleanup. But we use our now enlivened Green Amendment that got its legal life in December of 2013. We use the Green Amendment through advocacy and through litigation to challenge what was happening. And at this point, the story's not done, but at this point, that development is not happening. That sweetheart deal has been quashed. And the Department of Environmental Protection is now on track to hold those responsible parties responsible for cleanup of the toxins at the Bishop Tube site. We were able to do that now because we have a Green Amendment. It wasn't working before under the existing laws, right? The Green Amendment gave us what we needed. And there are other examples, and I'm not going to go into them because I'm out of time. So what's happening in Florida? What's happening in Florida, every state Green Amendment is different. The language is different to suit the personalities and the priorities and the legal mandates of that state, right? So here in the state of Florida, we have a really powerful Green Amendment that's being advanced. It's called the Florida Right to Clean Water. This is a movement that's happening with the leadership of the people through ballot initiative. You all are doing the work of getting the right to get this constitutional right to clean water on the ballot so the people, all the people of Florida can vote on it. That's one of the reasons why it's so powerful that you're here. We need you in order to succeed with the Florida Green Amendment. The amendment will be added to the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. Remember, that's non-negotiable. And it will create a fundamental right to clean and healthy waters. So what can you do? Well, go to FloridaRightToCleanWater.org, sign up for the newsletter, check out the action alert page, get involved. Find out what you can do, what's needed right now. There's opportunity for you, even if it's just talking with your friends and neighbors. But ideally, it's signing the petition that's in the front of the room and taking a couple of extra copies so that you can get your friends and neighbors to sign that petition and turn it in according to the instructions on the website. Or that Jim might tell you about. Jim, who, by the way, was in the picture, and so was Mel. You can, of course, get the book and share it and give people all the basics, right? Because not everybody is in this room. So that's a good way to spread the word, spread the message. But that's about the Green Amendment movement in total. Remember that. But it really gives that essential foundation. We have a new app that you can use if you want to be an active part of the conversation. This app, initially when you go on and when you post, it's pretty similar to something like a Facebook, right? Something like a Twitter, like a LinkedIn, if you use any of those platforms. But there is a community dedicated to Florida. And you can go in and be an active part of the conversation. Share what you're doing. Learn what others are doing and be inspired by it. Give your comments. Share op-eds that you read about or newspaper articles or whatever. Ask a question. Ask a question because Mel and Jim and others are on that app. I'm on that app all the time. So you can ask your questions and you can get them answered real time. So that's another way to get involved. If you have a phone, you can get it in the App Store. If you like to work on your computer, as I do, then it's the bottom middle one. Or there's a bit.ly link somewhere. There you go. There's a bit.ly link. I'm not highly techno, but I'm very active on things like this. Right. And so with that, I just want to leave you with one final thought that I'm going to read from the book. This is from the chapter that I call my Green Amendment Epiphany, which is really all about how this whole movement got started, at least for me. No matter where you happen to live, I'm here to say that you should dramatically raise your expectations when it comes to the environment. You have a right to pure water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. This right is inherent and indefeasible. It belongs to you. Many politicians rail against entitlements and dismiss millennials as an entitled generation, but they've got it wrong. Entitlement is not a dirty word. It is a recognition of rights. And make no mistake about it, when it comes to the environment, you are entitled. So with that, I say